Hello, and welcome to the 8th Annual Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television event. I'm Tom Kenny, the editor of Mix, and this is actually our second year in the virtual format, and it starts in about 12 hours or so. I must admit, I did not expect to be here a year ago, talking to my computer, using the word second annual virtual event. In fact, right up until mid-July, we fully expected to be greeting you right there in the Cary Grant Theater, right there in the Sony lot, in some form of limited capacity, virtual hybrid presentation. But health, safety, respect, these to come first. So when news of the Delta variant spread across the country, we had a very brief conversation with Sony, and it became clear that we needed to stay home and let the lot be filled with those who are actually making movies. Of course, we'd rather be in Los Angeles this weekend, bumping elbows, but in the meantime, the virtual format does have a few advantages. The main one being that we're able to reach out to the world. Last year, we featured the Speed of Metal, post-production teams in France, Mexico City. This year, you'll see program with Jennifer Walden in New Jersey, sits down with composer Mark Mothersbaugh in Los Angeles, then Dick and Hinchcliffe in England, and then back to the LA sound team behind the riveting sound of Antoine Fuqua's The Guilty. Janelle Riley from Variety chats with this talented sound crew in New Zealand that brought the loneliness and tension to life, and director Jane Campion's much anticipated The Power of the Dog. Two of the sound designers and mixers on the featured panel following the keynote work in New York, another in DC, the other in Hollywood. In fact, our keynote, coming up very shortly, features Wylie Stateman in Los Angeles and Thomas Dolby out in Baltimore, where he is head of the new media program at Johns Hopkins University Peabody Conservatory. The world has changed. It's a different world than when we first started this event 8 years ago. That's no question about that. But I'll stop now. You'll be looking at me way too much today, hearing this voice throughout the day as we interview these talented sound professionals. Before we begin, we need to thank our sponsors. They make this all possible from the very beginning. We have Netflix this year, which they've been tremendous with their help, assembling talent, featuring really dynamite movie making and television series. Here we get an inside look at two very, very sound drenched films. They're two talented, very unique composers. Netflix, let's face it, fresh off a lot of Emmy success. We have Focusrite and Genelec, longtime supporters of the Mix brand, and they were very early into immersive audio, which is the whole reason we started this event. They're discussing what you need to know before building an immersive studio. Meyer Sound, a few years ago, they introduced their Blue Horn speaker here at this very event. They're back in partnership with Dolby and Netflix, and put together a Ultra Reflex, a cutting-edge system that you just have to see and hear about. Adobe is with us this year, bringing us right inside the Vice Media Group and inside feature filmmaking with a look at how their post-production process can be simplified. The unified picture and sound is their mantra. Whole Grain Systems, Dwayne Weiss is back, bringing his Dime PEQ. It's a small company, and Dwayne has a panel that is loaded with talent. Just take a look at the names on that, featuring his dynamic parametric equalization. We have Audinate and the Peabody Conservatory with a focus on new technologies, the rapid changes taking place, and giving us an idea of what's coming next. We have Kronos in the booths. We have Kronos that does sound design tools. Otherworld Computing, if you need your Mac or PC hot-rodded and protected. Sound Particles. Nuno Fonseca, it's always great to see it. His company has taken off. He has some option where you can pay him with a phone now. Take a look. So enjoy your day here at Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television. Please feel free to chat in the window alongside each of the presentations, or you can go into the group room with Ask the Experts. And be sure to visit our sponsors when you can. They do make this whole event possible. And speaking of sponsors, we started this event in 2014 on the lot of our host partner, Sony Pictures Studios, with Tommy McCarthy. And typically he would be standing up at the podium right now at the Cary Grant Theater to welcome all of you. To welcome the whole film sound community, as he says. We asked him to do the same today. So before we get to this excellent keynote chat with Wylie Stateman and Thomas Dolby, let's hear what's been going on at the lot. Tommy?
Welcome, everybody, to the 8th Annual Mix Magazine Sound for Film and Television event. Although we wish everybody could be here at Sony Studios, as we have been in the past, But unfortunately, the COVID pandemic still rears its ugly head. I hope everybody has stayed safe and well during the past year and a half. But this has not stopped Mix Magazine from keeping this extremely valuable sound community event going. And I personally wish to thank Tom Kenny and Mix Magazine for making it happen again this year. As I have said in the past, this event is about a global sound community and allows us time to see new technologies from leading vendors coming out for release to benefit the workflows and creative capabilities. This event gives us time with technological vendors and creative panels to learn and discuss how we will continue to provide sound to all forms of entertainment. I'm hoping that next year we can bring this event back to Sony Studios and I can have the opportunity to speak directly with you and share in real time this amazing annual event. But while I have you, I want to share that during the slowdown in production caused by the COVID pandemic, our studio understood the need to stay ahead of the game in facility operations. And during the past 18 months, Sony Pictures Entertainment has invested in renovating 3 more of our current mix stages, this providing us with 10 Atmos stages out of the 14 stages we currently have. As you can see, stages 6 and 7 were gutted to accommodate the Atmos format for features and television episodic programming, increasing to 32 speakers in each stage and moving the consoles forward for optimal Atmos sound quality. In addition, as you can see, the Lancaster stage has been transformed into an Atmos theatrical format stage, using 42 speakers while again moving the console forward for the optimal Atmos sound quality. This stage also installed front 4-way speakers to match the speaker system that is in the Cary Grant where I sit today. By this time next year, we should have our 11th Atmos stage with a renovation of stage 12. All of this exciting news that I am glad to share with you today and can't wait for next year when you can experience these stages in person and hear the dynamic sound quality they provide. I hope you enjoy today and interact with those involved within the global sound community. And on a personal note, I am hoping you will check out the progress Sony Japan has made with the 360 virtual mixing environment and their other technologies they have developed for enhanced Atmos use at home. Thanks again to Tom Kenny and Mix Magazine for supporting our whole sound community as they have for decades through published release materials and with the Mix Magazine Sound for Film and Television event, again for its 8th year. Please enjoy today's event.
Thank you, Tommy. And thank you to Kimberly, Greta, Lane, and all the other fine folks on the Sony lot who do so much behind the scenes to make this event work when we're down there in Culver City. We'll be back next year. Now, one of the advantages of the virtual format we've learned is that it allows us to bring talented people together who might not otherwise find the occasion to get together and talk. So, to kick off Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television 2021, we asked 2 exceptionally talented sound artists to join us for a conversation on what we talk about when we talk about sound. Thank you for joining us, Thomas and Wylie. Let's start with you, Wylie. Sound plays a rather different role and affects the brain in a different way when it's attached to picture. You have this story in front of you. There's dialogue. There's action on the screen. What do you think about when you talk about sound, Wylie?
Well, I guess that, for me, the basis of sound is just sound for picture. So I think your audience here, and I'm so happy that people got up early on a Friday to join in this conversation. But I think the conversation that we're talking about is how to tell stories using nothing more than picture and sound. So as a sound designer, I love to think of ways to sort of keep people interested in what they're seeing by cleverly manipulating what they're hearing.
Thomas, you approach probably from a more traditional music point of view. You're not classically trained, but it almost appears you are. How do you approach sound when you first start looking at a project, or especially if it's attached to picture?
For me, really, it's about emotion. First and foremost, it's about what kinds of emotion we're trying to elicit from the audience. And the person that decides this is typically a director, a showrunner, somebody other than the composer. It's really the composer's job, and for that matter, the sound designer's job, to sort of interpret the desire of the director to try and create a certain emotion, and to underpin the emotions that are already up there on the screen. That's really the way that I see it. So it's interesting working with young composers who have very high artistic aspirations and think that maybe their path to fame is going to be, via doing music for movies, for TV, for games. One of the first things that I have to tell them is, look, you're not really fully in control of your destiny here. You're going to hope you get hired. You're going to hope it's a great show that you get hired on. You're going to hope that you have a great relationship with the director. And then you're pretty much at his or her mercy when it comes to what music you end up writing for the show. So the first thing to understand, from a composer's point of view, is that there's a boss here. You have a client, a customer, and of course the customer is always right. And so you have to leave your ego at the door and be prepared to be a part of the team along with the sound designer and props, wardrobe, lighting, everybody else on the team, in order to create the correct emotion and drama and to affect the audience in the way that the director is looking for.
It's interesting because we've talked about this before. Wylie, I'd like you to take off on a bit of sound as storyteller. We like to talk about sound as storyteller, but we really have a story in front of us, right, at this point. So you can be abstract, you can be exaggerated, you can be see a dog, hear a dog, but you have a story in front of you, and you take off from there. Do you care to comment, Wylie?
The creative force behind the Queen's Gambit, Scott Frank, I think summed it up really beautifully this weekend at the Emmy Awards. And he said that he basically convinced Netflix that they should make a series, a 10-hour series, about a young woman who's addicted to drugs and alcohol and, of course, chess, and make it so that the audience can really experience the life that this young woman led through two things: picture and sound. And while we're not responsible for the picture, we are responsible for the dialogue and how the music will enter and where it supports in terms of the mix, where it supports the dramatic action, and of course the sound effects integration into all of that. So storytelling, in terms of what it's like to make film, is really about the use of picture and sound as the only tools at hand for the filmmaker.
Thomas, you're a technologist. You go back to the 8-bit sound that you're talking about. I was in the Bay Area during the late 80s. It was an interesting time. I mean, but you're working within limits at this point. In certain respects. Can you talk to me about working with sound when you have limits?
I think limits lead to creativity, really. I think that for those of us that were lucky enough to, be able to pioneer the new technologies as they became available, such as sampling, such as digital recording, such as interactive software that would produce a nonlinear, unexpected result, sort of based on the user or the player's choices. I think in the early days of those technologies, before anybody had written the rule book, the instruction manual for them, it was possible to go in and be one of the authors of that rule book, by experimentation within those limits. But when I think back to the fact that, for example, my first sampler was a Fairlight in about 1982 that cost $90,000 and was capable of doing 8 voices of under a second apiece. And the joy and pleasure that I got, along with people like Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush and Trevor Horn and so on, from messing around with this magical machine, despite the limitations, we made entire backing tracks using just those 8 voices. And, conversely today, I mean, my iPhone has probably got a much more powerful sampler in it at this point. So I think that through the limited resources, through being forced to find diversions around the obstacles that you hit, that's when you're forced to be creative. And this is something I reinforce for my students, because, a 19-year-old today, if they hit a roadblock, they tend to reach for their phone, and a few key presses later, they've got the answer, right? Now, it happens to be the same answer that 10,000 other guys came up with in that minute of Google searches, right? So it stops them from actually being forced to use their ingenuity and find a way around it. And I like to take that safety net away from them and sort of force them to work within limitations. And I'd rather see somebody that was MacGyver, versus somebody that has access to all of the world's so-called solutions, via their iPhone.
Wylie, you were one of the first people to bring workstations onto the stage, if I remember correct, with waveframes back in the day, which provided its own limits. But at the same time, you have sort of multiple opportunities through working on film. I mean, could you add to Thomas about that limit that maybe early technology or your own resources force you into?
I agree with Thomas, and working through limitations is really what really makes this a worldwide challenge. So whether it's the limitations of bandwidth or the limitations of dynamic range, or whether it's the limitations of the specific story that we're working to, we're all sort of faced with this wonderful puzzle. And, I think that the great Walter Murch summed it up really well in one of his wonderful books. And he said that if you wanted to understand water, you'd better study ice and steam in order to understand what water is really capable of. And so when we talk about audio, sometimes, looking at the technology is sort of interesting, but really looking and examining the story and then sort of pushing the technology forward by studying the fringe elements of what we have to offer, whether it's the application of music. There was a wonderful composer named Jerry Goldsmith, and I'm going to sort of quote him, and he said that, no one has ever left the theater whistling the sound effects. And yet, there are projects, whether it's the wonderful composer Hilda, who did first the series Chernobyl, which I think had a wonderfully textured score, and then went on to do The Joker. I mean, she's literally studying not the limitations of theme or of melodies, but the limitations of creating texture and tension through the use of really interesting sound and sound design, and integrating that with the story and with the dialogue, and presenting it as a functioning creative element within the mix.
And a lot of the score for Joker, as I understand it, Hilda Guanadattir recorded in her kitchen with her cello. So, she didn't need a fancy recording studio. She found a unique sound, and it's fantastic. It's so iconic, the sound of that movie, and justly won the Oscar.
And that's what we're seeing now, Thomas. We're seeing people not being barriered by the limitations, but by opening up, sort of this idea that sound is a mixture of so many things, whether it's melodies and themes or rhythms. Sound really is a combination of these elements that trigger our minds to either focus or experience an emotional depth. And these are not limitations. These are the tools that we use as creative audio people.
We've always been amazed at how music and effects can work together and how they often don't. But that's sort of that bob and weave. And it made me think, we call it music composition. We call it sound effects creation. Are they really both composition? I mean, Thomas, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that they are. And I think that, I think recently you've seen this sort of dovetailing of sound design and composition. Dunkirk is a great example. You have Hans Zimmer, who used the drones of flying engines and, sort of Spitfire engines and gunfire and things like that to create this incredible score, which has his own musical elements sort of woven in, but in a way, those are just a few more faders in the sound design palette. And I think that works incredibly well. And I think there's a general trend in the industry to go in that direction. and maybe away from the sort of more conventional approach, via Max Steiner and Bernard Herrmann and John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, and the more 20th century approach is sometimes being it's sort of morphing into something new, which is a mixture of realism, the use of source sounds as the soundtrack itself. Social Network, which Trent Reznor did, almost all of the music is source music. It's the music playing on computer speakers. It's the music playing in the restaurant. But if you listen to it carefully, it's actually been very precisely scored, and it meets some of the same criteria that more classical composition would meet. It's just you taking a different approach to it.
Yeah, music and sound effects does this modulated dance, and it's really a conversation between the two. And there's sort of an expressive moment where each of them sort of takes center stage. And this conversation is back and forth, and it has to do with how the music starts, how the sound effects go away. And the mixer at this point is responsible to freeze all of those balances into what becomes a very dynamic experience that doesn't exceed the limitations of whatever playback environment we're designing for. But it's truly a conversation. And I think Thomas has it right. This conversation is orchestrated, and it's a call and response, and it's about themes and rhythms, and it's just pure storytelling in terms of sound.
Thomas, what do you talk to students about this modern world? What do you say to them about opportunity, about ways of thinking, about ways of working with effects people, working with a team? Where do they start?
Well, this is a new concept for many of them. Many of my students have been instrumentalists in an ensemble, and so they're used to the sort of discipline that it takes to blend in a choir, in an orchestra. But the composition that they've generally done when they arrive as freshmen, at aged 18, has been on their DAW in their bedroom, uploading something to SoundCloud and getting a bunch of comments. It's generally very individualistic, sort of solo approach to composition. Occasionally they have collaborators. They'll meet some Ugandan rapper online, and there's an element of collaboration, but being part of a production team is a brand new concept. And one of the things that I really drill into them is that it really is a team effort, and you could be the most brilliant composer, but if you don't hit your deadlines and get your files named correctly and be working on the correct version of the picture at the right time, and be open to editing or even deleting an entire cue because that's what the show needs. Unless you're willing to take all of that on board, you're not going to get hired in the industry, because the word will go out that you're that flaky guy that made me look bad because Monday morning I was supposed to have that mix back and I hadn't heard from you by Tuesday lunchtime. That kind of reputation will go around the industry a lot quicker than the fact, there's this hot young composer that writes some pretty good stuff. Am I right, Wylie? I mean, so the key to a healthy career in the industry is a willingness to fall in with the requirements of the whole team and make your colleagues look good. Allow them to do their work professionally.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Thomas, be amazed at the possibilities, take chances, study old themes and then find new ones. This is a wonderful area of exploration. And in terms of sound, there are no limits.
I mean, some final thoughts, Thomas. Let's start with you. Some final thoughts on what we talk about when we talk about sound.
It's a fascinating time, that we're living in, and I think that I think the world is going to look very different, after what we're going through at the moment with COVID. One of the aspects of that that's hugely different is that we're all going to be working remotely like this a lot more often. And it's going to be less about getting in a room in front of a screen and a pair of speakers and sort of saying, yeah, that's too blue, or, that's too dull, or whatever it may be. We're going to have to get used to this remote way of working. But interestingly, there's a generation of kids coming through that have grown up with that and less about the interpersonal skills. So I think it's more important than ever to reinforce, as what Wylie said, there are endless possibilities. What these kids are willing to do is spend hours delving into software synthesizers and effects and so on, getting the most obscure parameters and figuring out how to do something creative with them. They have as much dedication and they put in as many hours to the technology as they do to the video games that they play. And so they're going to come up with stuff that is going to make Wylie and myself scratch our heads and go, how did she do that? How did he pull that off? I have no idea what that sound is. And we eventually will hand over the mantle, to the next generation. And they're going to come up with stuff that we can't even conceive of.
I think Thomas summed it up beautifully. And I would just simply add, study the past, but go bravely into the future and experiment with audio in all its wonderful forms, be it composition, music composition, be it sound design composition, be it dialogue composition. It's an endless frontier. It's not restricted by technology. It's only limited by your imagination and the time that we have to work it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Wylie. Thank you, Thomas. It's funny, I get paid to talk about sound, so I much appreciate you taking your time out of the day to talk to me and to our audience. Please come back and visit us with more sound for film and television in just a few minutes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.